Hi everyone, how's it going? My name is Braden Riggs. I'm a developer advocate with Dolby IO, and today I'm going to be breaking down search engine optimization for technical docs, why you should care about it, and some tips and tricks onto how you can improve your documentation's searchability. But before I do that, I think it's important for me to provide a little bit of context on how I wound up getting involved with this project, why I'm at the Docs Australia, and why Dolby is here getting involved in technical documentation, and how this kind of topic with regards to search engines and technical documentation has become a bit of a priority for me and a bit of a focus for the last couple of months. But before I dive into that, a quick little bit about me. The Docs Australia. I am born and raised in Noosa, Australia, up in Queensland. However, I did move to San Diego about 5 years ago to study at university, to study data science and machine learning, which is maybe why I have a bit of a funny accent throughout all of this. I've definitely lost a lot of my Australian accent. But yeah, I moved to San Diego, lived there for a couple of years, and then during COVID, I moved up to San Francisco to join the Dolby team and to work as a developer advocate. So San Francisco is where I'm headquartered. It's actually where I'm recording right now at my home in San Francisco. But I am catching a plane tomorrow back to Australia, which I'm really excited about. I'll be spending Christmas up on the coast, which will be lovely. So that's me. What about Dolby? Well, some of you might be familiar with Dolby from things like Dolby Cinema, things like Dolby Atmos, maybe even you've seen Dolby Vision on some of the TVs that you purchase. In fact, the company's been around so long, you might even recognize things like this. This is actually from my car that I drive. It's a 1994 Lexus. And I was surprised to see this on the radio of the car when I bought it, but actually there's two examples of the Dolby symbols on there. So when I put tapes into the car, there's actually an option for Dolby to do some noise reduction on the tapes. So long story short, Dolby's kind of been around for a little bit. It's been around for a while, and it's kind of evolved in a bunch of different things. But they're all kind of connected through one central theme, which is audio and video experiences. So really it's a company that focuses on how we sense and experience things. And it's been really successful with this in the audio space. And it's recently been making a lot of progress growing its brand in the visual space as well. So it's only natural that a company that focuses on premium media experiences is going to evolve and change as we change in how we consume media and content. So Dolby wanted to jump into the online space, and that's fundamentally kind of why I'm here. This is kind of exactly what Dolby did with Dolby IO. So Dolby IO is Dolby's developer platform, which provides APIs and SDKs for correcting audio in user-generated content for industries like podcasting, or use cases like building many-to-many video and audio conferencing solutions for things like telehealth, and probably our most popular tool, which is building one-to-many streaming solutions for industries like virtual events and concerts. Now, all of this kind of leverages some amazing Dolby technology under the hood to create a more premium audio and video experience. So why am I telling you all this? Well, I think it's important context for how we got here and some of the problems that we've had to tackle. See, even though we're part of that Dolby, Dolby IO is really a new direction for the company, a developer self-service platform, and it's kind of the company's first dive into the world of software and self-service technology. So of course, with any company doing that for the first time, there's going to be a lot of learnings to be made about how these communities work and how best to engage with them. And this is where I come in. So I have, as I mentioned, a background in data science, but a decent amount of experience doing software engineering. And I joined the team back in 2021 as a developer advocate with the explicit goal of removing these barriers to adoption for our APIs and SDKs. Now, this role has me moving between a number of different verticals and teams, from doing things like creating content to working with customers to even attending trade shows and doing public speaking. But interestingly enough, one area that has been particularly important is the use and how developers use our technical documentation. See, I've spent all this time talking to prospective users that have gotten some really interesting insight into the developer community, the ones that are using Dolby IO and the ones that are potentially interested in using some of the tools on our platform. And in talking to all these people, a few interesting themes began to arise. I started hearing things like, ooh, I kept searching for Dolby IO developer platform on the web, but I kept finding Dolby, not Dolby IO. Or, you guys are great, I wish I could have found your tools months ago. Or, how do I find your website or your documentation? Now, this theme that I've found, developers, many of whom are first turning to Google to look for solutions and APIs, are having trouble finding our content. And this is kind of a major red flag, or this ticked off a few warning signs for us that we really need to be evaluating this process and understanding how people are getting to our products and how they're navigating our documentation and kind of where they're finding us. See, I think the trap that we fall into in the technical writing space and creating these developer products is this myth that everybody finds and navigates through technical content in the same way, where we expect users to start on a product page, enter into our documentation landing page, and then navigate sequentially through documentation to find, what they're looking for, or to get started, or to get to the API reference. When in actual fact, that really isn't the case. In a lot of ways, Google messes this up for developers by dropping them off at random locations throughout the journey. So when we find out developers are having trouble finding our docs, again, this is a major red flag because we're failing to cater to how this community navigates and learns about products. And we're failing to capture this section of the journey, which is the developer that is going to ignore all the marketing material and just go straight on the hunt for your documentation pages. Now, it's easy to look at this and say, well, if they're having trouble finding the website, they're having trouble finding the documentation on Google, isn't that a marketing problem? And, in a lot of ways, SEO has traditionally been considered part of marketing's domain, but documentation's digital footprint is huge. In fact, if there's one takeaway I want everybody to leave this presentation with, it's that documentation's digital footprint is huge. And you mightn't realize it, but documentation can really represent a major portion of a company's web presence. And this is why I think it's important for the tech writing community to also pay attention to SEO and to keep an eye on it. And using our own documentation as an example, of the web pages associated with the Dolby IO business unit, 92% of them are documentation. Or in this case, just over 800 unique pages across our 3 product suites. So yes, it is a marketing problem, all this SEO and this searchability, but documentation has such a huge digital footprint that it doesn't mean we can't lend a hand to make sure all of our content is optimized, not just the marketing materials. Now, don't panic. I'm not talking about clickbaity nonsense, and I'm certainly not saying we need to go back and rewrite anything. Most likely, a lot of the content and documentation is perfectly fine as it is. Instead, what I want to discuss is a few different documentation tips and tricks that I learned over this saga of attempting to please, the all-powerful search engine. But But really just these like simple, often overlooked things that can help increase the searchability of your documentation, guides, and the overall site. Now, before I jump into that, I'm just going to give a quick rundown on how search engines work, right? So at their core, search engines are fundamentally sorting engines. They sort the web based off of your query, or rather they partially base it off of your query. And this sorting is really interesting because it implies that they have to find a way to order this content for you. And that's why I say like partially base it off of your query, because a lot of what Google does is it takes your query and then it tries to find the content that's going to be most valuable to you. Now, the content that's most valuable to you isn't necessarily the content that you just queried the search engine for. And this is because the internet is filled with a lot of noise. It's filled with a lot of pages that just repeat the same word over and over again 1,000 times. Now, if you search for that word, that page might be the most direct, most 100% match to your query, but it's not the page that's going to provide you the most value. This example I have on screen, I searched WebRTC, and it has about 12 million results. And it comes in with those 12 million results in around like half a second, which is, it's a lot of information. So Google has to decide which option to show first. And it does this based off of a number of factors, including one, how much the website pays Google, but two, how relevant this content might be to the user. Now for this presentation, we're gonna ignore the pay part since that's pretty straightforward. You know, if your company has the money, sure, they can pay to be higher in the results. But we're kind of mainly interested in understanding how we can ensure that our content is more relevant to the user that is typing these queries in, and how we can encourage the search engine to show our stuff without having to pay a ton of money. Now, to decide what is like interesting to the user, Google will show buckets of users, small groups of users, different results for their queries, and measure things like clicks, bounce rates, bounce rate being when a user clicks on the site and then clicks immediately off, exit rates, and a bunch of other unseen factors that deduce where a page or a piece of content provides value to its users. Now, although Google is trying to evaluate whether a user finds value in the content, there are some things that we can do to nudge it in our favor. And in many cases, these changes also improve the quality of experience for the end user. And this is where we can start with our first set of solutions. We're going to begin with kind of some basic, pretty general stuff. So sitemaps is a great place to begin. So for those that aren't familiar, a sitemap is just a schema that outlines the relationship between the pages and resources on your website. So you can imagine this as a comprehensive kind of like tree diagram where your landing page connects up to your documentation, and your documentation connects up to these reference pages, and those reference pages connect up to other reference pages and change logs and things like that. Fundamentally, you know, a sitemap just tells Google which pages and files you think are important to your site. And it also provides valuable information about these files. Now, the key word there is what you think is important to your site. Now, you're probably saying to yourself, well, I think every page is important to our site. And you know, when you're thinking of it from a top level, it is. All the documentation pages are valuable to the site. But there's a lot of unseen pages that might be left over from when you changed hosting providers, when you changed domains, things like that. And it's important that, you know, even though we don't see these, they might subtly be lurking behind the rest of the page. And a sitemap is a good sanity check for making sure that a lot of these ghost pages aren't sitting in the background messing with search engines. So for example, you know, a sitemap can include information like when a page was last updated, any alternative language versions that the page also provides, or even just information around the number of characters on the page, things like that. And this is great for SEO, again, like using that language example. If you do have alternate languages for your documentation, that's a really important thing to let the search engine know, as it will actually boost its performances for people that are querying in those specific languages. As well as things like last updated is also another important one. If the website's providing value but was updated a long time ago, that's okay. But if, for example, the website isn't providing value and it hasn't been touched in a while, the search engine will tend to assume that that page is just legacy. It's not useful anymore. And so there's sitemaps that include information about the pages. They can also include information about things like videos that you have on there. And a video entry can specify things like the runtime of a video, the rating, the age appropriateness, or there's ones for images. Images can include things like where the image is located on the page, if it has captions, if it has alt text, that sort of stuff. So that's sitemaps. And sitemaps typically work best if your website has a lot of content, right? Typically, sitemaps require you to have over 500 documentation pages if you're using it for documentation. Or it's good if you have like isolated content or pages that have few external links to it, or if your documentation is very media dense. And now, sitemaps are especially important to note because recently with a lot of developer platforms, they've been using content hosting sites. README is a good example. And some of these sites actually don't do this by default. So it's important for you to put in the effort yourself to make sure that your documentation has a sitemap, because that could be influencing how easily it is for developers to go find content via Google on your documentation. Now that was sitemaps. Let's talk about another really interesting one, which is broken and redirect links. So broken links at a base is just a bad experience for anybody trying to navigate the documentation, including search engines that are crawling through your pages and your websites trying to understand the relationship between these pages. If it hits a dead link, it just takes them to a 404 page, which isn't a good sign to a search engine that suggests that perhaps this page isn't regularly used, perhaps this page isn't regularly updated, perhaps this content is not providing value to the users. Now, we have a great tech writing team at Dolby IO, but across all 800 of those pages of documentation, there is occasionally a slip up. And this could come when products change names or functionality shifted. And additionally, there are also things like redirect links, right? So broken links are ones that don't work. Redirect ones are ones that kind of direct to somewhere else, and then that's intercepted and they're delivered somewhere else. And that can occur because maybe you've changed domains or product names or something along those lines, and you've accounted for that in your linking, but it's as a redirect link. So it's really important that, one, you don't have any broken links, and two, that your pages redirect appropriately if they are going to redirect. Otherwise, you could inadvertently be actually damaging your SEO. So you really want to avoid things like redirect chaining, which is when you have a redirect goes to another redirect. Actually, if I switch back to the previous slide here, you can see that there's a couple different variations of redirects, 301s, 302s, 303s, 307s. The redirects that represent that your content has moved permanently are really good as long as they're not chained between a number of different redirects. Otherwise, if something's just moving temporarily, a temporary redirect is fine. Now, internally, to solve this problem, we actually built our own tool, which weekly scrapes through everything, checks for all the broken links, makes sure that we're not doing any crazy redirecting type stuff. But there are a number of websites out there that will offer this service for free or for a small fee. One example that I just found really quickly was like Deadlink Checker. It's in the name. But a lot of these sites offer, you pay them a couple of dollars and they can periodically run and make sure that your website doesn't have any broken links, which again is good for search engines, and it's a more positive experience for the end user. Next, let's talk about alt text. So you might have noticed a section on images for alt text. Now, alt text is an accessibility feature that lets users read or hear a description of the image and its relationship to the page. Now, this is typically used by visually impaired people as an alternative to seeing the image, and kind of as a way to help make websites more inclusive. Google has actually started accounting for this in their SEO. So they actually check and penalize pages that don't include alt text on their images. Now, luckily, we at Dolby IO weren't doing a bad job at this. Actually, we were doing a pretty good job. But I thought this was an important one to mention and share to everybody, because it's kind of like a double whammy. Not only is it going to help with people being able to find your documentation from Google, it's also, more accessible, which is just an all-round win. You want your content to be as accessible as possible to every person. So I think that's a good one for people to remember. So sitemaps, broken links, and alt text are all pretty basic. But what are some more advanced tricks that we're working to improve our SEO at Dolby IO? Well, one trick was actually to host the images on the same domain and site that you're showing them on, not on a third-party image hoster or a bucket. As we mentioned before, people getting to the docs and navigating content isn't as linear a path as you would like to believe it. And some people find content in a range of ways. Now, this one actually came up because we had a mix of images, some that were hosted on the site and some that were hosted on an off-site bucket. And surprisingly, we actually noticed that it wasn't uncommon for users to enter our docs through Google Images. So they were searching through something, they'd switch over to Google Images, they'd find an image of a diagram or something like that that looked related to what they wanted to do, and they'd click on that and they'd actually navigate to the site that way. Now, it wasn't a ton of people, but it was just enough that we thought it'd be worth moving over our images. And again, this helps with like SEO stuff because it helps search engines establish a good relationship between the images and media on the site and the actual site and whether it's providing value itself. And it's also good as just an indicator for these search engines that this is content you own and that you're not ripping this content from somebody else's site. So that's a really interesting one. I would encourage everybody to actually look in and see, are you hosting images with your documentation, or are they hosted somewhere else? Another really interesting way to boost doc SEO is by increasing the amount of backlinking to your documentation. So backlinks are links from other sites that direct users to your site. Now, search engines treat these links as like votes for the quality and authenticity of the content on your page. And it's a major reason why sites like Wikipedia continue to rank so highly in the search. They have so many backlinks. Now, for documentation, backlinking is easier than you'd expect. And a lot of the time, it actually just happens naturally. Depending on your product, you might have users building sample apps, writing blogs, and tweeting, using social media, and engaging with the community. And if these users are interacting with your product in that way, it's good to make sure that they're linking to the relevant documentation, which can be as simple as just reaching out to these people that maybe built a sample app and asking them to include a link. And so this is something that we did. We had people that were building their own apps, writing their own Medium articles, doing stuff like that. And a lot of times they're just maybe forgetting to include a link to the documentation. So by reaching out and saying, hey, if it makes sense, can you include a link? A lot of them are really, really receptive to do that. And so it can be very natural. And this is actually a nice thing for people that then discover this other content, these publicly made sample apps, these community-made sample apps, because a lot of times they want to be able to find the documentation through that sample app. So, in the interest of time, I want to start wrapping up here. But for anybody interested in more doc SEO tips, I recommend learning about things like jump linking and URL structuring, which are advanced techniques that can, again, help with search engines indexing your pages. But for now, I'm going to wrap up. So I'm sure everybody is wondering, what was the impact of these changes, and did we see improvement in how people were finding our documentation and whether people were choosing to become developers using our tools? Well, a quick disclaimer is that when you make some of these changes that we talked about, they don't fix things overnight. And instead it can take weeks or even months before the traffic begins growing as these search engines index and learn about the changes to your site. So for making these changes, it took a few weeks, but slowly we started to see higher growth amongst our documentation via Google Analytics. On a side note, I like Google Analytics as a tool for evaluating site traffic, but there are a bunch of other ones out there like Full Story and Hotjar and even HubSpot and things like that. So interestingly enough, according to our Google Analytics, thanks to some of these changes that we made and are continuing to make, we actually saw a 13% increase in the last 3 months in entrances to our documentation from Google search. Now, as I'm recording this presentation, it's mid-November, but we're on track to see similar growth month over month. And this is in contrast to earlier in the year where we saw either between 1 to 2% growth for this particular metric. So to recap, you should care about the searchability of your documentation. A good user experience requires users easily finding the documentation in the first place. And considering docs represent so much volume and digital footprint, improving doc searchability will just improve the searchability of your whole site at the same time. And improving this SEO for docs doesn't necessarily mean you have to rewrite your content or make even these dramatic changes. Rather, it's actually just a couple of these really simple things that you can do to make sure your documentation is compliant with search engine standards. Now, ultimately, you're just trying to play within the rules of a lot of these search engines, which means things can change, different things can happen. But a few tricks that have worked for us, in the last 6 months and that we've been working on and are continuing to fix and improve about our documentation include things like having these site maps, correcting broken and redirect links, making sure everything's got alt text, and then doing stuff like image hosting and encouraging our developer community to do some backlinking. And by fixing or continuing to work on a few of these simple issues, we've been able to grow the number of self-service developers and actually just improve the site as a whole, which is great. Now, I know that was a lot of content to cover in a pretty short amount of time. So if you have any questions, please reach out to me over LinkedIn or Twitter. I'm happy to keep chatting about this stuff, share a few different other ideas, and I'd even be curious to hear about what other people's experiences have been trying to improve the discoverability of their documentation. Additionally, we are doing questions at 2:10 Australian Eastern Time, so I'll be there and I'll be happy to answer some questions, do some clarifications, and just say hi synchronously with everybody. So thanks for joining my presentation, and again, feel free to reach out.
Welcome everyone. This is the first time I've actually spoken live to you all, so thanks for coming along today to Write the Docs day one. It's really awesome to see so many new and returning faces here. But we've got a job to do right now, and that is actually to take some questions from Braden and Claire. So we've got some, I think I've got a selection of questions I'm going to just sort of throw to you both, and we'll just sort of see how the conversation evolves and go from there, I think. So I've got, the first one's actually for you, Braden. And it was one that I was interested in. So how often do you typically run your link checker to validate your links on Dolby IO?
Yeah, that's a great question. So we kind of run it in two different ways. We run it first when our tech writers are done actually like writing up all their documentation and are ready to send it live. We do a quick check then just in case there are any links to parts of the website that haven't been made publicly accessible yet, or in case there's a mistake in how the URL was formatted. And then we run it every week. So we update our documentation at a pretty solid weekly cadence. So about every week seems to be a nice balance for us.
Okay, so you're pretty much pushing out the docs as soon as they're ready. You're not waiting for any sort of big deployment push like a lot of like some companies do. It's just get them out as soon as they're ready.
For some of our bigger releases, we definitely take that approach of holding it back. But we have so many different releases with some of our smaller products and things like that, that it just makes sense. And we have people actively trying to use that stuff straight away. So it just makes sense for us to have it up. And a good note as well, we run the link checker first thing Monday morning. And we do that because we do not want to run it Friday afternoon, which was our other idea, because just in case everything breaks ahead of the weekend, we want to make sure that we have plenty of lead up in the week to fix up everything. So that's an important one to note.
Just to sort of slide it back into BAU or business as usual work and just get it done like as time permits throughout the week. It's a really good approach, actually. It doesn't feel like the crush at the end of the week.
Yeah, definitely.
Yeah, that's really good. Now, Cameron actually posed a question as well, and it was about the comment you made about people arriving at your site via images, which was an interesting one. He was wondering if the users that arrive via the images actually go on to engaging with the content in the page, or whether it's just more they get the picture and they want to see that in context of the other stuff around it. Just wondering if you might be able to help us understand a bit more about that.
Yeah, definitely. So this is one we actually investigated pretty in depth just because it threw all of us off guard. I think it was something like 5% of our traffic to our site, and our site gets a pretty large amount of traffic, but about 5% was coming from images, which at first you're like, well, that's not too much. But of the 5% of traffic that would come through, about 20% would actually actively sign up for an account. So we can track that through our platform. We can see the session. And that 20% that would actively sign up for an account is about a 5–10% improvement on what you normally see of people entering the site through the traditional way. Our running theory for why that's the case and why that's significant is a pretty large part of our organization is research. And a lot of these researchers are at conferences, giving talks, presenting diagrams, putting diagrams in papers and things like that. And then we recycle and use a lot of these diagrams, like how our WebRTC infrastructure is organized and how that architecture looks is like a diagram that we have. And so they're using these a lot. And I think people search on Google, like example of good WebRTC infrastructure. And like a couple images come up, they see how complicated it is to build it themselves. Click on the image, go to the site, and go, oh, well, somebody else builds it for us, so we might check that out.
That's very interesting, and that's pretty good conversion of just images alone. That's very, very good, very good indeed.
Definitely, I think it very much depends on what kind of industry you're in and what kind of product you're selling. Like a lot of what we do is live streaming, so it's a very visual product. We have integrations with game engines, so it's very, very visual. And so I think a lot of those people resonate when they see a visual representation of a live streaming app, for example.
Right. Claire, I might actually throw over to you for a moment there, because Cameron also asked this question as well of your presentation, and that was what the role was of the role profile of the owner role in that one, and what the whole ownership piece was for that particular job description.
Look, in hindsight, I kind of realised I probably should have elaborated on that a bit more, since I laboured so much on talking about how important it was. The owners are the people who like own the change of the content, I suppose. So it's the product manager usually who is aware of what's coming, what new features are coming, what might be changing about something, navigation, other things that might be changing in the product. They are responsible for making sure the docs get updated. And one of the points of communication to them was, you're not responsible for doing the change necessarily, but you're responsible for making that change happen. So ownership is about not necessarily the doing, but definitely being responsible for it happening, however that, in whatever shape that takes. And that might be there's a tech writer on their team. That might mean they assign that role to a developer or other person to try and make that happen, or I was trying to get the business to hire more tech writers so that there were actually people to delegate the work to. Otherwise, who does it? But yeah, so apologies for not making that super clear in the presentation, but an owner is, definitely the person responsible for making sure the docs get updated.
So the person driving it, basically. Team. Yeah.
Sorry?
The person who's just driving other people to get the work done.
Yeah, but they also own the expertise of that area. So they own that part of the product that is, about the function. So they understand it the best. Their developers work on it the most. The QAs, understand things and that kind of thing as well. So it's about aligning the right expertise, I suppose, to the area of documentation as well, so that a tech writer, whoever it might be, doing the documentation knows who to go to, knows who's driving it, knows who to ask questions of, and that kind of thing too.
Right. Actually, there's another question that's just popped in now, so I'm going to stay with you for a moment there, Claire. You talked about the feeling that the doc, that the tool was a problem when it wasn't. Did you find, though, that the tool you were using did have limitation that made it a little bit harder?
I'm not sure if it's the bit where I said the tool can't solve the problem.
Maybe that's it, yeah.
If that was the comment, because I found a lot as a contractor going into the business, they were kind of like, oh, maybe we need a different tool to do this. And it's sort of like the tool kind of isn't the problem. You can pretty much make any tool do what you want it to. I mean, obviously some are better than others. No arguments from me on that one. But if without the good content, without just the starting point of decent content, even like proper organization or any of that, it doesn't matter what tool you use, you're going to have a big hot mess. So if that's with the clarification that you're after, that's sort of what I meant, because I actually didn't find Zendesk a problem. It was fine. It's purpose built. It kind of, the docs for Zendesk were pretty good, and it's not too hard to use. It's just that it's like any tool, if you're not, it wasn't about giving people an experience of the help, it's that leap you have to make, which is like, I'm not trying to get people to use the help and have a good experience. I'm trying to get people back to what they're supposed to be doing with the content in the help,
solving their job to be done.
Yeah, solving the job to be done, not trying to, so it doesn't, the doc experience is important, but the content experience is more important.
Content is king after all. That's what we're here for. That's right.
And queen.
Yeah, that's right. That's right. And queen, indeed. That's a good point. I think we've got another one that's about Zendesk, which I'll just quickly ask because it probably will be a quick answer. What was a tool you used to get a list of all the Zendesk articles?
The tool we use for what? Sorry?
To get a list of all of the Zendesk articles.
I'm not exactly sure what was meant by that, but we just there's a report in Zendesk that you can kind of just list all the articles. So that's how we mapped the current articles to the new architecture that we came up with. But and apologies if that point wasn't clear, but the new structure was completely from the ground up built, not based on the previous. We just mapped the previous to the new to kind of get some reuse and get some update and maintain, as much current documentation as possible, but we're just going to heavily update it because wholesale replacing it wasn't an option either, because, you do lose things like we would lose links from, current onboarding presentations to the docs and stuff like that. If we could, us update the target doc, we were better off doing that than sort of starting again fully. So I'm not sure if that answered the question or not.
I'm just watching the comments to see if it did. Just shout out there.
Because Zendesk just gives you a list. You can sort the list of all your documentation in like the last updated or the oldest, or
So it's got some reporting.
Yeah, it's got
reporting functionality.
I don't know if it's an add-on though, so I wasn't really. I'm not really aware of whether that was like you paid more for that bit or something. So apologies if that's going to cost you more.
That's good. That's good. I think I definitely covered it there. So thanks for the clarification there, Claire. The last question I might throw back over to you, Braden, and also Claire. Feel free to comment on this as well, because I think your experience will probably say you might have some opinions about this too. How effective have you found sitemaps as a SEO tool, Braden? As a part of the SEO strategy, perhaps.
It's another good question. I think it's when we made these changes and we decided that we were going to overhaul our documentation and improve it, we did a lot of these changes like in conjunction with each other. So I couldn't off the top of my head point out like an exact percentage of like a group traffic by this much. But I think all the good sites do it is probably the best way I can explain it. Like it's less about something that would necessarily improve your SEO as much as it's something that is just required to begin with, like to have a good site. And so by not including it, you're actively damaging your own website's searchability. So I think it's pretty useful, and it's a really like low effort thing comparatively to actually do. And so even if it is just a 1% increase, it's still 1%.
Still an increase. That's right. What do you think about that, Claire?
Yeah, I don't know if I've thought about sitemaps in the way that you're talking about sitemaps, but I've thought about content models, the way content structured and hangs together and relates to each other, and how things are grouped and related, and like that family tree of documentation kind of thing. So I definitely think of things that way. And for me, that's definitely about understanding not just providing good organization or good spread or good that kind of thing, but really makes you think hard about the information itself and how it relates to how content relates to each other, and how you can create pathways through the content for people to find what they need as well. So I think that's really important, and probably that's part of the SEO, right? It's that journey, following links through, and all that related stuff really matters. But to me, I care about the user. It matters for the user. I know I should care more about what Google thinks, but I care about more what the user thinks first.
I think we're probably drawing towards the end of that Q&A session, which is gone incredibly fast. It always does when we're actually talking about insights that people have got from your talk. So I just want to thank you both for taking the time out from your day to day to join us and answer those questions for everyone joining the conference today. Before we go, just wanted to give a shout out to Lynette Voller, who's been doing all of the amazing sketch notes for the conference. It was actually an Australian invention, not so much invention, but for the conference, it was something that we pioneered here in Australia, and it's gone to the other conferences overseas as well as something that's really valuable. So do check out the links that are being shared on the Write the Docs Australia Twitter channel, which is Write the Docs AU, all one word. And you can go and have a look at the amazing sketch notes that Lynette's been doing up in there, along with all the other highlights that you would normally get from the social media team managing that account during the conference. And one last thing as well, which is very important, is that we've got coming up the lightning talks as well. Now, Gaurav, I might actually just quickly run through them because we're a little bit short on time, if you're all right with that. But we've got 3 people ready to step up and have a go. We've got Cameron Shorter doing my open source docs edition, and we've got Shauna McGee-Kinney doing Red Hot Chili Papers. Nice playing words. I do like a pun, as you probably realize by now. Print docs then and now. And then Gaurav actually has got one of his own for Unlock the Hidden Job Market, Secrets to Finding More Writing Opportunities. So that will be happening right after the break, which is happening right now. So we're going to be coming back at 2:45 Eastern Daylight Savings Time for the lightning talks. And Gaurav will be your host with the most for those, running that session for you. So we will see you back here at about 2:45.
Cool. Thanks, Jared. Thanks, everyone.
Thanks, everyone.